Welcome to CGT Square Talk, where top experts in the industry share their groundbreaking journeys. Brought to you by BlueSquared, your strategic digital partner.
Okay. Gary said he needs a couple minutes. He's putting on his makeup.
I need a
Shower
better
today.
camera.
We can get you set up with a real rig.
I think that the camera is like too slow or something.
Yeah, I think you're talking and your mouth is not moving.
Is it an Android camera, Ian?
Oh man, I'm getting it from all the Roths.
Good.
An Android camera.
Why are you doing Android, man?
This is a PC. Android. That's just generic for anything that's not Apple now.
Gary,
It wasn't in the invite.
Hi, Gary.
the rest of us
Everyone.
found it in there.
How are you?
Good.
Good.
Did you get your makeup on?
Yeah. I got
Good.
my hair combed anywhere.
At least. So today, guys, I thought it would be interesting if
We started. Is this how we started?
yeah, of course we
We're
started.
recording.
It's been
We're just
recording
talking.
for 12 minutes, actually.
All the best podcasts start with the guest saying, "Have we started?"
We started.
We started.
I thought today, so many of our guests have been talking about collaboration and either internally at an organization or externally at an organization. And I thought it might be interesting to chat a little bit about collaboration and what challenges that we see, because I think we see them all the time. And then how, what are some strategies or tools, or even on the technology side, Gary, that you can do to help mitigate that, right? Or at least manage it better. And so I'm going to start because I had some interesting thoughts about this earlier, because I was thinking about collaboration and I was thinking about the space that we're in and how early it is on the life cycle and how dynamic it is. And whether you're dealing with systems or processes, the idea is, you have a plan, and then once you get started, you have to adapt and you have to change. And it made me think of kind of the ultimate agile organization, like a sports team, right? So you think about, like an American football team or what have you. You basically, right, you get your play, you're ready to go, and as soon as the ball snaps or what have you, right, the whole thing starts to change, and you have to adapt as things start to develop. But what I found was interesting, because that is so dynamic. It seems to me that when you have a very specific and short-term goal that you're trying to reach, like they are, right? They're trying to score, they're trying to win a game. They are able to collaborate better, right? Because if the team's not collaborating and each guy doing their job and not creating roadblocks along the way, they're successful, right? But if each one is kind of like in their own silo, and I think silos is stuff that we come across when we're doing our thing, it starts to break down, right? The collaboration kind of breaks down. Anyway, so that's kind of my way of teeing it up. And what I was also thinking is management is so important here, right? Like the coach, who enables that collaboration. And if the coach is starting, like Julia was saying, to have to knock down roadblocks, that's probably a problem. Anyway, that was pretty long-winded, but I'm kind of curious to hear what you guys think about that analogy and the idea that, quick, dynamic goals that are faster are kind of would help to collaborate.
Well, I think also using that analogy is they've created, if they have a shared vision, shared goal, right? Like winning this game, winning the championship, and everyone's aligned to that, that's going to generate a better team rather than, hey, if I score 30 points this game, I'm going to get a better contract, so which is something that I think, unfortunately, we see when it comes down to it. It's like collaboration is a great idea, and then when it comes down to actual implementation, people get a little bit self-interested. So I think that working towards a common goal and being incentivized towards that is really like how you can help motivate to that collaboration.
I'm so glad we don't have a Ted Lasso reference. I thought that's
You
what
want one?
Not really. No.
You just did it. You just did it.
I do like the analogy of American football, specifically because you can prep as much as you want to, and you can have all your plays in a row, but things change, and things change rapidly. Fortunately, in our space, things do change, but not as rapidly, right, as it is in a game of football. But nevertheless, things change, and if you have common goal, like Ian, you said, that everybody's marching towards, you have the systems that can support that change too, right? So it's very important when you have things that are lined up in a way that you can support the change as well. It's you might have a team that want to have a change, but there's no support mechanism to do that, right? Everything is rigid, everything is in place. So that might also be very interesting.
So how do you deal with that, right? So I'm going to extend the analogy a little further. So, you're the quarterback, right? So we're going to use American football. Apologies to people maybe who don't fully, track with that. But you're the quarterback. It's a pass. The play is to throw a pass, and the ball is snapped, and you're supposed to stay in the pocket as long as possible, right? That little tunnel between the center where you get the ball and if you're rigid about that and you stay and stay and stay, as things are breaking down and developing, you're going to get sacked, right? You're going to get tackled. When you see the best ones, of course, they scramble out, and then they create a play out of that. And it makes me think of these larger organizations who have very well defined for years and years, right? Decades, processes and systems in place that really, really work well for their legacy businesses. But once you start to get into cell and gene, it's almost like that quarterback who won't get out of the pocket, right? It's like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to stay here, and come hell or high water, this is it, right? And there's no deviation. I mean, how do we deal with that? How do we, in these larger legacy companies, and if you're spinning up like a cell and gene practice, I mean, how do you get away from that?
I'm going to be a little bit contrarian here, because I don't necessarily feel that silos in themselves are bad things. I mean, what is a silo? It's a specialist group of people with a certain responsibility. Where silos become a problem is when they don't interface, when they don't speak, when they don't talk to each other. And the problem you have to solve is, and the tooling that you have to provide is the way for people to see across silos what's coming next. I can't use the American football analogy because it always looks like chaos to me. I hear the commentators and they say it's a shotgun, or it's this play, it's that play, and they all look the same to me. But at the end of the day, every person on the field knows what they're supposed to be doing.
Right.
They know where they're supposed to be. It's difficult to get there sometimes because you've got someone on the other side who's trying to stop you. But if we take that analogy and apply it to cell and gene, I would say that you have to provide tooling that helps people know what everyone else is supposed to be doing and when they're supposed to be doing it. And that comes down to good interfaces, good integration, of course, and that's my area, so I start there first. But also it goes into analytics, control towers, dashboards, things that can show you. And an area where I'm getting more and more interested in is risk identification. How can you look at an order, look at where it is right now, the time of year, the transportation route it has to follow, and say, based on what I know in the past, there's a risk here, and you need to be aware of that risk, and maybe you can mitigate. So I think it's all of those things makes up this idea of collaboration, not necessarily knocking down silos, but getting silos to talk to each other.
I actually like that, Gary, and also kind of turns on the light bulb in my head thinking about that, where forward thinking AI buzzword AI, right, as everybody's talking about it, right? So this would be a great kind of a use case to say, hey, we have data. Let's just say we have data, and what can we do in order to predict for the future? What is it that we can do? And that's a great tool to have in the toolbox, as well as having an adaptability in a tool that you're building specifically with integrations and everything else, right? So being adaptable to these situations and being able to kind of predict stuff, that's kind of, that could be very interesting.
So, following up on that, Gary, have you noticed, like what I've noticed in collaboration, you know, whether it's systems or business partnerships, there's a kind of what's in it for me. And I don't know if that's necessarily bad, like, but there's
it's healthy. I think it's healthy.
It's healthy. So I think sometimes some of these collaborations or these interfaces, they're often one way. And we need to think about always making it two-way, because do you get resistance from certain stakeholder groups that are like slow to maybe implement something, or because it's going one way, it's going from this business and the other business group needs it. But that initial business group isn't really seeing much benefit out of it. So it's
actually, maybe Gary, before you answer that, I want to, so something you guys said, actually, Ian, you brought this up before, and I think it's super important. The common goal, right? Whether it's scoring the touchdown, winning the championship, the common goal, I think, is super important. And the what's in it for me is a slippery slope there, right? Because I think we've all worked with people who are very interested in what's in it for me so that I can get the next promotion, I can get the next pay raise, or what have you. But then you have the other side of that. What's in it for me if I really contribute to the team and I do my job, right? Like you were saying, Gary, you know, you have specialists on the field, right? Just like you have specialists in the organization. I do my job really well and I collaborate to make sure that we hit our end goal. You're going to get a better contract, right? Because you're one of the stars of the implementation of what's happening. I think you have to be very careful about that. What's in it for me?
We also have to be careful that when we say what's in it for me, I'm not thinking personal, right? What's in it for me as a person is can be unhealthy. I'm talking about at an organizational level. Organizations who have a responsibility and to deliver the certain, you know, key indicators and definitions of success, have a self-interest in meeting those goals, but you have to also make sure that they are also incentivized to work together. And I think the key is just to give good tooling to make it easy. I do find a lot of the things I've been working on or seeing requests for are end-to-end views. And it reminds me that cell and gene is a logistical problem as much as anything, and that logistical problems require high-level viewpoints at any point in time to be able to see where things are, where the patient is, where the order is, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to clarify that, Anthony. It's definitely not an individual what's in it for me, but from a team perspective, I think that's something that we all have responsibilities to do our best, and that's sort of what's in it for me, or a way of answering that as well.
I'm going to give you a Ted Lasso reference now that's gonna link back to UCLA, because I think I was looking at this earlier today, and that John Wooden, for those of you who know, the winningest, you know, coach in basketball, college basketball, his pyramid of success, he actually has a thing in there that says, you know, ambition is good, but it has to be for a noble cause, right? Which kind of harkens all back to the team. So, and I don't know if you saw the show or not, but Ted Lasso had that up on the John Wooden's pyramid of success up on the wall. So
let me throw something else in there. All these changes and all these capabilities that we're talking about, one thing also to keep in mind, we are definitely working in a regulatory environment, right? Everything is highly regulated. So there's just so much that you can veer off the path. If something is rigid, it could be for a specific reason, and that might not be able to change.
I mean, I understand the idea of regulation, but I think you can still follow the rules and still be dynamic, right? Still be able to adjust, still be able, because if you're really good at, let's say, validation, right? The validation process, and you're coming up, you know, the team is coming up against some kind of a challenge where they need to do something in a certain period of time, or because you are so good at it, you know, such an expert, and you're great at what you do, you should be able to, you know, creatively contribute and still stay within the regulatory guidelines, right? As opposed to, you know what I mean? I think
true. And thank you for saying that I'm great at validation. But one thing is, I guess that's what you said.
You're great at everything, man. If it weren't for Gary, you'd be the best.
Absolutely. So the goal is to kind of follow Gary's footsteps. But what I was trying to say is that Absolutely, you're right that if you have process that you can actually follow and make things change, yes, you can do that. What that does, though, it adds timing, right? It adds an additional effort and it adds the complexity. And sometimes regulatory groups within the larger organizations are really kind of like a gatekeeper, right? And sometimes it's really hard to convince them that, hey, we need to make this change, because they have this stuff set up. They already know what they're doing and everything else.
So that you're kind of talking legacy versus cell and gene. So that goes, are we all on board with the common goal? And to be quite honest, in the smaller organization, I think it's easier. But in a larger organization, where, like you say, you have a regulatory group, are they dialed into, and have they agreed at a management level on down that here's our common goal, right? We have a patient who has to have their treatment in 14 days or they're actually going to expire, right? They're not going to make it. And I think, who was I on the phone with yesterday? I can't remember. Maybe it was Victor, actually. And we were doing a software demo, and they were saying, this end-to-end thing, like Gary was alluding to, is a real problem, because they can't, they're not getting fast enough data, and then the patients are failing out, and it's becoming a problem. So how do you deal with that, right? I think, to Ian's point, you have to have this common goal.
And I think being incentivized to that common goal, not just like, we all know, like, hey, we want to do the best we can for patients and creating a good product, but actually having like organizational structures that support that. So if your organization sets it up like, hey, we need to turn around this this drug in 14 days, you're like, well, I can't do that. It depends on manufacturing. That's not my org. It depends on logistics. It's like, yeah, no, this is the common goal. If we can create that, because too often I see these people have their little fiefdoms, and they're like, well, I can do this, and that's what I do. And like you said, Gary, like, silos aren't bad, right? If you know your role and responsibility, but how do we bridge that? Like, how do we bridge it? So like, we're all in different orgs, we're all different people, but this process is one group to make this product.
So one of the other things interesting about the regulations, right? So I was on the phone yesterday with someone from DIA, and one of the things that she mentioned was that the industry, the regulatory industry right now, is really talking about harmonization. They're trying to harmonize the process. They're trying to harmonize the data, and then harmonization across not just organizations, but across regulatory bodies with different countries. So you can get to things faster and easier and stuff like that. So, it actually speaks to that entire thing. Harmonization is a great word, right? So if you create harmonization within the organization itself, everybody's going towards the same goal. Everybody's harmonizing data from the data perspective. That could also be, one of the avenues that can help organizations to stay in contact with each other and have this kind of a way of working, if you will.
So how do you create that shared goal? Because I've seen it personally. I've seen it sometimes work. Certainly, we talked to Julia last week or a couple of weeks ago, and Julia Zatz, and she's very good at helping people understand the common goal, but that's her specialty. And I know that Gina McCready, that we interviewed a while back, was talking about exactly what you were talking about, right? This idea of align, exactly. So
you get the stakeholders to kind of be a little more open and not pull the rope over to their side a lot. I
was going to ask you, Anthony, because this made me think about like consortiums that have formed over the years, and you've been involved in it, and they hadn't seemed to stuck. And why is that? Or how can that be changed so that these consortiums are actually create the value that they should?
Yeah, I don't know, man. It's
hard.
It's the legacy thing. I think at a smaller company, you're a small biotech and you're trying to get things spun up, and you're only cell and gene, right? This is what we're trying to do. We're trying to create this therapy. I think it's easier because you're learning and you're just developing these things. So when you develop them, you're doing it already kind of for a specific purpose, as opposed to, I think, the large organizations that try to get into it, I think they really have to have true management buy-in, because they're making the bulk of their money somewhere else. It's not from this, right? So they do have different levers, that are incentivizing.
And even though they have a common goal, and the common goal is a patient, they still have to answer to the shareholders in some way.
Yeah, I suppose even the ones who've raised money have to do that too. But it reminds me of, how in the U.S. the telephone service kind of developed very slowly, and in some cases, in other countries actually leapfrogged us because they jumped in after the technology was already pretty well developed, right? So I don't know. So Gary, I'm trying to. So you really think that data collaboration is a real key here in terms of being able to provide information to all the different stakeholders? We're kind of talking about as let's say a therapy is going through its process, supplying people with enough data so they really know where things are at any particular time. Is that kind of where you're?
Yeah, I would say so. It's business intelligence. Mm-hmm. And we can look at it at a micro level. Where is this patient in their journey, and where do we expect them to be? And are they at risk? Or we can look at it at the macro level, where we can look at the whole study or the whole the open orders at the moment, and see where they are.
How does that help break some of the non-collaboration? I won't say break the silos, because you make a good point that specialists you need them, right?
Yeah, well, again, I still feel I feel a little bit contrarian in all of this. If I'm a logistics controller, collaboration isn't going to help me. I'm not going to ask Anthony to come over and enter this order for me, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I have to still enter the order. I have to still manage that order. And I've got to get to the point where that order is in a state where the courier will collect it and I'm done. I'll wait for the next order now and before I start working again.
But you just talked about like two other stakeholders in there, the logistics people and the person making the order. So like,
so when that goes, when I can't do my job, there's a problem with customs, or the courier can't pick it up for a couple of extra days or something like that, or something's damaged, I have to be able to get that data to the next person in line. It's just like how we deliver software. When the development team is slow, quality pays the price because it's their time you eat up, and then you hand it over to quality, and now they're in a rush. If you tell people in advance, if you keep them involved all the time in the process, you can have them prepared, and maybe we can talk about scope changes and things like that to try and get it delivered. With cell and gene, I think, yes, it's not, you can't solve it necessarily the same way, but keeping everyone involved up to and including the patient is really, really important, because there are certain preparatory steps that have to take place, and that is required. If there's going to be a delay, maybe you have to delay those steps as well. The sooner they know that, the better. Surprises don't work so well in this particular field. So if you're entering an order and the order takes too long, and you can see that or show that through a dashboard or through some sort of collaboration view, then I think you help the process. You can only help the process. But what I'm interested in the long run is seeing those risks, being able to predict the knock-on effect all the way down to the final product delivery, for example. Because
how would that work? So I totally understand what you're saying about communication and the importance of even advanced communication to make it less, and it's also less frustrating when you're working, right? It's like, oh, okay, I'm waiting on something, and then it never shows, as opposed to somebody sending you a preemptive email or text saying, you know what, I'm going to be 5 minutes late because of whatever. You know what I'm saying? So I get the communication thing, and people, unfortunately, are not always great. Some are better than others at that. But talk a little bit about that preemptive thing, the risk. How is that gonna?
I think in some ways it can be deterministic rules, but I think where I'm more interested in is and exploring, I've been thinking about it a lot, is the idea of AI, like even neural nets, simple classification of data. If certain things don't happen, then other knock-on effects will happen. And being able to identify what the features of failure look like, or what the features of risk look like, and be able to model those and predict them. This isn't cutting edge. This has been around a long time, but it surprises me that we don't see a lot more of it around. Now, LLM has brought a lot of interest in AI, and I'm not talking about LLM at all. It's something that's much more traditional, much more statistical, but it is business intelligence.
So why, it's been around a long time. Why hasn't it? Sorry, Armen, but I'm going to push it back at you. So why hasn't it?
I don't know.
Well, I mean, we don't have that transaction. We don't necessarily have that data, right? That transactional data end to end. That's good data. That's cohesive that you can work on.
It's very common. I think it's used a lot in e-commerce, in Amazon.
Yeah, but you have like millions of transactions going through these e-commerce systems, and it's easy to, not easy, but when you have so much data and represented by different stakeholders, then it's easier to run analysis on it.
Is it because maybe they're more transparent to share that data, where in our space there's not a lot of the transparency and sharing of the data? A lot of it has to be kind of kept closed off. And to your point, Gary, I think you're talking more about automating some of these tasks that can be ahead of time, that can predict and spit out maybe communication, some of the communication that can go out, right, without waiting for a person to actually press that button in order for somebody else to know and understand that something is stuck, something is not coming.
Yeah, it's being able to see in a control tower. There's where you are. There's the current state of the order. And there's also, I don't think you need a lot of orders either, maybe in the order of thousands, but not hundreds of thousands. It's not that kind of AI that we're talking about here, but
more than 5.
Yeah, right. But it's that kind of aggregation based on your past history. You don't need that much history to be able to make use of it. But in a control tower situation, be able to see, well, here's where I am and here's where I'm likely to be based upon the orders that have followed this similar route. And they are pattern based. They do tend to originate from similar places to similar places with similar kinds of features that go with each order that would allow for that classification. Now, do I know yet what all of those features are? I can guess at a few of them. I got some very interesting leads I would like to follow up on, but that's part of this process as well. But I feel that's where you're breaking it down. That's where you head for good collaboration, is just giving that overview. There has to be a mixture of not just where you are, but also where you think you're going to be.
Think about it this way. You're making me think as we talk here about cross-organization collaboration. So, or taking advantage of it, let's say. So Armen made a great point. They don't want to share data, right? So you're not going to, but somebody like yourself who might be working at different organizations could somehow, let's say, anonymize who owns the data. But once you're finding a pattern, right, whether it's at company A or company B, or let's say you look at it at company A, company B, and company C, and you start to see the pattern, you can actually provide predictive consulting in a sense, or advice on, if you see this starting to happen in your supply chain or what have you, you can expect these risks to potentially appear. So it sounds like almost a neutral third party, based on what you're saying, could perhaps get around some of that, the collaboration issue, because people want to keep certain data proprietary, right?
I mean, I think each study might have its own challenges. There may be a common thread across companies and across studies, but what if there's a trend that everyone who provides a second sample has a 45% greater chance of screen failing out? Now, the question might be, well, we can put a risk model in there. We can actually say this is a second sample, and there's a higher risk that this patient's going to screen fail out. A better question is why? What's different about the second? Is there anything about the first sample that might indicate that they would need a second sample? Now you're getting into true business intelligence. Mm-hmm. Is it because it takes too long? Is it the transportation route? Is it the courier? Is it the method of packaging? these are the things I think there's a lot of interesting areas to investigate there. And what, are we in the theme of collaboration? We're in the theme of driving collaboration. It in itself obviously is a data-driven kind of exercise, but it would then result in some kind of overview, some sort of end-to-end view that would say, here's the risks, here's the things that we think might raise a risk with this order. So I've been thinking about it a lot, and it's nascent for a lot of these companies. I mean, for cell and gene, but it's not too soon to start getting into stuff like this.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting, and I think you're just the guy to do it. All right, guys, we're a half hour in, even though we've been online for 11 minutes more than that, as Gary was getting himself ready to be on camera. You look good, Gary, man. I mean, as
I'm in my fall flannel, so yeah.
I see that. Gary's in Boston, so it's
I think everyone in Massachusetts, or half the men in Massachusetts, are in flannel today.
Yeah, we're all in solid colors, right? I'm wearing Bruin blue, and the other guys are in dark colors, and you're in plaid. All right, guys. Well, this was fun. Hopefully people get something out of it. Gary, I think what you're talking about is super interesting, and Ian, you always bring a fresh and new perspective. Armen, I see you all the time on this, and it's always a pleasure.
It is always
all right, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Don't forget, don't hang up, and we'll see you later. Bye. Bye.
Subscribe for more insights from leading CGT experts.